Welcome to Literature News, the podcast on YouTube. I am Hans-Georg Ruprecht. At Literature News in Ottawa, it's such a pleasure and an honor welcoming the award-winning poet and author of many collections of poetry, Christopher Levenson, who is talking to me by phone from Vancouver, British Columbia. Great to have you on our show.
Great to be here, Hans.
Okay, good. In fact, as you put it on your homepage about yourself, which listeners can find easily online under your name, Christopher Levenson is also a translator, a literary critic, an editor, and a professor. It's my pleasure, Christopher, to mention that we were many years ago colleagues at Carleton University. Now,
Yes.
Please tell us, if you would, all about it, or let's say something more about that amazing profile of yours.
Well, I don't know how amazing it is, really.
Well, that's what I believe.
I'm no longer, of course, a professor. I was for a little while. Yeah, I was adjunct for a few years, but nobody called upon me to do anything. And of course, once I moved to Vancouver, I did teach courses 4 times, actually, in a seniors program at Simon Fraser University, 12 years. Anyway,
but please tell us more about you as a translator, and I'm really thrilled by your work as a translator, but also by what you have done. For me, these are really great achievements within the context of Canadian literature, Canadian poetry, and as an editor.
Well, yes, I mean, that is certainly. Let me just deal with the translations first. I haven't been doing much translating recently. It's something I'm very interested in, and I would like to get back to it, but who knows how much. I'm 92 now. Who knows how much more time I have. And of course, when the crunch comes, I always prefer working on my own work to translating, however well or badly I do that. I've been I hope I will get back to translating more of some of the post-war German poets, and there's one particular Dutch poet, that I want to work on, but I haven't been doing very much of that. Now, as for editing,
allow me just to ask, how did you, as a young poet or young author, come across a German-Swedish novelist such as Peter Weiss?
I think by that time, this was in the early 60s.
Yeah, 61, yeah. Actually, it's Abschied von den Eltern, which you translated as leave taking. And then the other one is Fluchtpunkt, the fugitive. Yeah.
I had translated a few individual poems by German authors, Gunther Eich, Enzberger, and so on. I think I got that commission through Michael Hamburger. He was, not only a good poet, but an excellent translator from German.
Yes.
And he happened to be a friend of mine. I mean, I got to know him, I think, in my final year at university.
But
and he steered 1 or 2 things in my direction, including the 2 novels by Peter Weiss, Abschied von den Eltern, and
let's remind us for all of us, who Peter Weiss was or is. He was the most important author of the 70s or 60s and 70s. With works, this is so important after all, He's a playwright, his famous Marat Sade. So where he,
which we saw actually. Interrupt a moment. My first wife Ulla and I saw the night before we left for the United States in 1964. We saw it in London. The translation. Yeah.
You saw it in German in London?
No. We saw it in an English translation.
Amazing,
in the West End.
Yes, amazing. But there are two other important titles. There's one which has an abstract title, but is in fact a novel, The Aesthetics of Resistance. I mean, this is so almost contemporary, The Aesthetics of Resistance. And then, of course... Yes, and then, of course...
Sorry, I hadn't even heard of that one, The Aesthetics of Resistance.
This is actually a novel, but it's, of course, for today, it's still extremely meaningful. And, of course, then the other equally important title, which deals with the investigations during the 60s and 70s of crimes against humanities within the context of Shoah Holocaust. The book is The Investigation.
Yes, again.
So Peter Weiss is a major author, and I was so impressed. Actually, you spoke about this when we were colleagues at Carleton. I was so amazed that you, as a relatively young poet, took the time and energy to translate two novels by this amazing, very important German-Swedish author, Peter Weiss.
Well, I mean, they were amazing novels, but they were also very lyrical novels, and I mean, I found it stimulating. I didn't find it in any way sort of oppressive to translate those. I mean, I'm thinking back now 60 years, of course. But,
yes.
Yeah, I was more pleased with that than my subsequent things.
Yes. Christopher Levenson, please tell us more about your, I think, equally ambitious work and initiatives you took as an editor, as the founding editor and director of ALC, which is now still the leading and trend-setting poetry magazine in Canada. It's the number one. Yes, for us here.
Yeah, well,
how did you
started off quite casually?
Well, tell us about how this started.
Well, two of my colleagues, both of whom unfortunately have now died, Tom Hannigan and Michael Narowski, and I forget who made the initial suggestion, but we decided that it was about time that Carleton had a literary magazine, not just for the students, because I had actually done that for a few years, but for a wider audience. Michael Narowski was involved in the first issue, but not afterwards. In the second issue, Tom Hannigan and myself, we tried to do it together, but we had too many differences of opinion. And so finally, Tom withdrew, and from the third issue on, I was the sole editor, except that, of course, I wouldn't want to be that entirely so. Where I had I think 5 or 6 people whose judgment I trust to be as editorial advisors, and any particular poem that we accepted normally had to be approved by 3 out of the 4 people that I sent it to. And I reserved for myself, but I don't believe I ever used that. Certainly from the 3rd issue on, I was the sole editor. And then, of course, after about 10 years, I handed it over to a couple of people, and then they did it for a couple of years and over. So I can't claim any credit for what it has subsequently become. I certainly was happy that we printed poems by a number of people who at that time were unknown or just beginning, and have subsequently become quite well known. And also, and I think that's important too, I wanted it to be a magazine of poetry and poetry criticism, and we had longer reviews than was normal in most literary magazines at that time. And of course nowadays, poetry reviewing is it's almost extinct, reviewing as opposed to simply noticing and saying what the poems were about and so on.
Yes.
So I had this urge not just to publish good poets, preferably younger poets, but also to have some sort of critical framework.
Do you still have at least a sense, if not a recollection of the, let's call it the poetic climate or the intellectual climate of the late 70s as far as the writing of poetry in Canada goes? I'm not asking after trends or asking for trends and highlights, but what was your feeling? You are coming and you were, let's say, intellectually and culturally formed and informed by your experiences in Europe, and of course what happened in the UK, and we'll come to this in a moment with your first collection of poetry. But tell me, do you still have a feeling for that, what was either coming about, or which was a tradition? There was, of course, a tradition of poetry, but with Arc, so the magazine, something new happened in Canada. Could you describe that?
Yeah. One of the things that I became aware of very soon, I arrived in Canada in '68, and of course it takes a little while to find out what's happening. And of course, as usual, if you're living in Ottawa, everything seems to be happening in Toronto or maybe to a certain extent in Vancouver. So we didn't feel at the centre of things, but we're certainly aware of a very large number of new poets coming up, and especially a large number of younger women poets. And I think that was due in the longer term probably to people like Sylvia Plath, but in the Canadian context to Margaret Atwood, whose first I think 3 of her first 4 works were poetry, and who I think has been consistently, well, not exactly underrated, but she's not nearly as well known as she should be as a poet, but she had an enormous influence on younger writers. And there were also new publishing houses, such as House of Anansi.
Yes, of course, yeah.
But and there was and I think this was largely due to the policies of the Canada Council. There was much more money around then than there is now for supporting new ventures, both magazines and publishing houses. And I had a sense that this was where it was happening, that the things were there were many more volumes of poetry. I mean, simply sheer numbers, what about the quality, being published in the late 60s, early 70s, and on into the 80s than had been the case before Trudeau, basically.
Yes. Now, let's make a big move, and let's talk about Christopher Levenson, the poet. It's about time. The author of 14 published collection of poetry, and of course of the laureate is of a great distinction, was a famous award. But before we come to these aspects of your work, allow me to raise, generally speaking, a question about, allow me to use a stock phrase, about your lyrical self. Yeah, your lyrical self. I mean, let me develop this a little bit. Since Arthur Rimbaud's famous letter to a friend of 1871, modern poets do maintain by now frequently, exactly as he puts it, and I give you the original French phrase, je, c'est un autre. In other words, the self is another. It's another. So, which is, of course, in a way, a radical idea. And I'm, Christopher Levenson, I'm wondering, I would like to lead you back to your first important, it was not an independent collection, but the major portion of a book edited by Edwin Moore, entitled In Transit, New Poets, 1959, which got, by the way, your contribution got the prestigious Eric Gregory Award. How did you see yourself in those times, let's say late 50s, 60s? I mean, if it is still at all possible to peg this in a way in relation to the poetry of that time, say 1950s, 1960s, one speaks as historians of poetry of the so-called movement, right? The movement, or the modernist, right? So, or to put it in terms of associations, I have followed this, of course, for more professional academic reasons, but it is a time when Philip Larkin's first collection, such as The Less Deceived, appeared. Oh, I'm wondering, when did you hear or read Allen Ginsberg's Howl? Was this a reference to you or not? And what meant, in fact, the work of Edwin Moore to you as a young poet?
Okay,
it's a lot. It's a lot.
But first of all,
I'm so curious.
When I was at Cambridge between 1954 and 1957, for 6 of my 9 trimesters, I was editing a magazine called Delta. I was editing Delta, and we had again quite a large review section because it was connected with Downing College, where F.R. Leavers was my director of studies, and it was very, very sort of critical. Anyway, we did a special issue on the new movement, and we attacked them. And
so why?
Thought they were over. I guess they felt that it was a very superficial sort of cleverness, and so on. And I was not consciously writing my own poems in contrast to or relation to that, but it was very different. And there were one or two other anthologies at that time. I can't. I'm not sure if I.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Let me go to my bookshelf.
But to put it this way, was it too formal?
Yeah, there was also a group anthology. I was in Philip Hobsbawm's group that also became quite well known, and I can't remember the other one. But anyway, there were other groups meeting, first of all in Cambridge and then in London, that followed a different course, but I never felt really part of a school in the same way that the new movement, movement could have been thought of as a school. I mean, they are all, it's the same with any group. As soon as you try to pin that label on someone, they say, well, I'm not really part of it. But nevertheless, it was perceived as a particular movement, a particular approach to poetry. Not only did I not belong, in fact, I didn't like what they were doing, but I didn't really belong to any other opposing group, you know.
Which makes now the strength and the originality, right?
Part of any movement in that sense, well, right from the beginning.
We're listening to Literature News, bringing you literary voices, critics, and ideas from Canada, Europe, Africa, and Latin America, with Hans-George Ruprecht of Carleton University in Ottawa.
Christopher Levenson, allow me to come back to my question. Does this distinction between you, the author, and your lyrical self mean anything, or does it come across in a way? I mean, who is talking? Who is the one who writes? And we will see this in a short moment with your last collection.
Right. Now, in my early work, and certainly in a number of the poems in Transit, it is definitely a sort of biographical self. I mean, as I look at my poetry, I feel that in the beginning I wrote what were clearly, autobiographical poems in some ways. Some of them got outside that, but I wasn't confidently using the I. It was mostly we or they, in my poems. And later on, and I think this has become increasingly so over the decades, I feel I have developed a certain persona. I mean, I'm well aware of Yates and the persona.
Yes, well, exactly. I'm asking that. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Yates is one of my all-time favorite poets.
Interesting. Yes.
And I look at some of those early poems. I think, oh my God, this is just prestige Yates. But I've grown out of that. But I think I can now speak confidently as an I, but it is not completely the autobiographical I. So I mean, I'm not a Rambo. I mean, obviously not in stature and other way. And I read the assemblies and so on, but it's not a movement that I consciously adapted or adopted.
Yes. Christopher Levenson, I'm so glad that you was, if I may say so, an intuition which I had. And I wanted to ask you this, but you have revealed it by yourself, namely Yeats. So, in fact, this would lead me right away to your most recent collection, Moorings, poems, right? Now, Yeats, William Butler Yeats, we would immediately come up, both of us, with Sailing to Byzantium, right? So, what is, and moreover, in fact, what is this network of associations which are coming up when one thinks about the importance of moorings? You know, it is, well, first of all, let's say the collection was published by Caitlin Press in Qualicum Beach, British Columbia in 2023. Now, was this title, but precisely the plural of mooring, you know, in meaning, of course, I guess everybody will understand it, but let me try to get my sense of it. It is, in a way, these are acts or of making fast or connecting a boat with lines on a quay or dock with strings, whatever it is, you know. And there come, of course, in my mind, all kinds of poetic associations and references. We mentioned William Butler Yeats, but also, you know, again, Arthur Rimbaud. I'm sorry to come back to Arthur Rimbaud. Le bateau ivre, no, the drunk.
Oh yeah, le bateau ivre. Yes,
of course.
So that wasn't a deliberate connection on my part. Yeah, but the moorings, I decided on that because, you know, I have been here now in Vancouver since 2007.
Yeah.
So almost 20 years, and I don't know how many more years I have, but I have, you know, in a sense, made myself fast here. I have established a place where I am moored, and I don't think, unfortunately, I mean, I would love to do a lot more traveling, but I don't think it's very likely, you know, outside Canada, but certainly not at the moment with the economic and political situation. But so these are poems of someone who has, I think, found his place, a sort of place for resting and looking back and coming to terms with, you know, his life and his probably fairly imminent death. I don't know if that answers your question at all.
Yeah, no, but I would like to look precisely at your collection, you know, but you know, this image of let's say the poet in a boat, or maybe the poem as a vessel.
The poem. I think more the poem as the vessel. Yeah.
Yes. So I'm wondering, and your collection gives me quite a number of fascinating, well, not hints, but clear indications. If I look at the section of your volume where you refer to visual art, you know, visual art. But let me develop this or ask you a little bit more about this. Is there, and of course, in my mind, what really comes up is, of course, Seamus Heaney's Nobel lecture, which is, of course, so intriguing when he what he says. So I'm talking about Seamus Heaney, Nobel Prize in Literature 1995, which is his lectures entitled Crediting Poetry, where he said, and I would like to get your take at that, quote now from Seamus Heaney: poetic form is both the ship and the anchor. It is at once a buoyancy and a holding. Can you connect with this? What is poetic form for you?
Yes, I'm both the ship and yes, I can see that. I mean, I admire his work a lot. I'm not quite sure what I.
Well, I mean, is it this kind of what do you understand by? Could I take from your work as well that there is something like a buoyancy of the inner self, maybe of spirit, proper to your mornings? I mean, this idea of the buoyancy, something is getting settled again, or it's coming up again, it's being restored, and it is holding,
Yes.
But your text...
Yeah. The thing is, as a quote-unquote practicing poet, I mean, I don't usually think about why I am doing something, and even afterwards, why I have done it. I mean, I am just concerned to make the thing I'm doing as clear and as tight, if you like, watertight.
Yes, yeah, that's it. Yeah. Look, I mean, and you're achieving that. This is my reading, which is really, which I find so modern, so lasting, in fact. You're achieving this with, as far as the form goes, with free form, It is, you have your own, for each poem, you have your own form. This is absolutely remarkable.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear.
Yes, this is the way it comes across.
I have been, this isn't something one does consciously, but I think I have developed over the decades now a relationship to poetic form. I mean, I can still, if I want to or if I need to.
You could write a sonnet, of course. Yes, of course. But you don't.
Sorry?
You could write, if you wanted, you could write a sonnet, but you don't.
Yeah, but exactly, I was going to say, I could write a sonnet. I have once managed to write a villanelle and so on, but what I was consciously aware, what I was aware of over the years, over the decades, is that I was trying to get away from the iambic pentameter, which of course is what we normally speak in. I mean, I have sometimes used with a class a passage from, I forget, was it Hardy or anyway, one of the novelists, where I showed that, 3 or 4 successive lines were completely in iambic pentameter form. I mean, they weren't set out as that, and he wasn't consciously doing this, but it's so close to our normal English speech pattern. And I wanted to break away from that because that had a constricting effect. And I consciously, for for a long time, and now I think it's only semi-conscious or unconscious. I think in phrases, in cadences that are not iambic, are not pentameter, and that has had a freeing effect. In fact, I'm reading at the moment something I should have read long before, Dennis Lee's book, Resting with Cadence. And one of the things that I find about so much poetry that is being published or broadcast now is that it sounds like prose, and I can't feel any pulse to it. I can't feel any cadence, and that is one of the things that I am very concerned about. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, a poem is supposed to be using not every poem all the time, but poetry is supposed to be using all the resources of language. And one of the main resources, as far as I'm concerned, is the sound of words, the sound of successive words, the sound of phrases, and I feel that is something that a lot of poetry nowadays has simply ignored or got.
Christopher Levenson, I'm so thankful to you because it really connects with what I have in mind and what I wanted to ask you. Maybe at this very moment of our conversation, it would be lovely if you could just render, not necessarily mechanically read, but give us your interpretation of a poem of yours that would maybe also in a way indicative of what I dare to say a little bit pretentiously, your ars poetica, your a work about your writing.
Yes. I haven't written anything that I have felt specifically with an ars poetica, but I have got one poem which I hope will one day be in a magazine, and I've also got.
Oh, that's wonderful! An unpublished poem.
Pardon?
It is unpublished.
Yeah, it's called History, Alas.
Okay.
And just before I even start reading it, I took to heart a statement by T.S. Eliot. I can't remember the exact words, but it was to the effect that anyone who wants to be a poet beyond the age of 25 should have a sense of history.
Mm-hmm.
And I take that to mean that, he or she is not writing simply about his or her love affairs or, childbirth or whatever. Important though these are, but should have a sense of how he or she sort of fits into a social context, a historical context, and how the outer world sort of relates to one's own experience. So anyway, that's what I'm trying to do, and there's an epigraph which gives me my title from W.H. Auden's famous poem Spain, 1937. History to the defeated may say, alas, but cannot help or pardon. History, alas, begins with our own birth. Of course, we consider all that preceded us fodder for academics, but what we are witness to is always hit or miss. Out of ramshackle memories, we forge personal stories. When they hear the year of my birth, people can figure out how much I have seen or been compelled to watch. So, though I can't recall exactly where I was when Hammarskjöld's plane crashed in the Congo or Patrice Lumumba was killed, I do remember when a friend just back from the States who had brought us LPs of Joan Baez, a few days later rushed in shouting that President Kennedy was dead. Such turning points redefine everyone's future, blizzard our minds with what ifs. Then, 5 years later, in a hotel, waking early, I turned on the news. Poor Robert Kennedy wheeled into the ER. Too late. He was already history. In the commercial break, an ad for exterminators. I felt like a voyeur. Never an activist. I tried to rely on words to make my feelings known. But who is listening? During the Vietnam War, I saw a sign in Madison, Wisconsin. War is good business. Invest your funds. Those words stayed with me. We played fortissimo. That and a ballast of books hold me steady for now. Somehow relieve the pain.
Christopher, I am so thankful that you share with us this new poem, which raises so many questions. And let me ask you one simple but also maybe complicated and perhaps too tricky for our conversation here, but let me give it a try. How about in this poem which you just read, understanding time and space? We have a sense of time, but also you say it's not so much important when what happened, but that it happened. We have a nice picture of yours, by the way, which with your permission we will also attach to our podcast. When you look at the beaches there, is it
Yes.
is it the moment where the waves are coming towards you, or is this a space?
Yeah. You know, when you write something, I mean, I suppose any kind of writer, I mean, it isn't simply churning out sort of commercial bestsellers, but hope that he or she will have something to say, not just for one's contemporaries, but for future generations. And you hope, therefore, that these poems will, in my case, will survive and have meaning, when I'm not any longer here. But I don't, I mean, one of the important things I feel is that I don't think of myself as writing for anyone else at the time. I write first of all for myself, and then I hope that it will mean something for other people, even when I'm not around to to draw their attention to it. I've not been very successful in the last couple of years getting poems into magazines. I think that's partly because the people that used to accept me at various, I'm thinking specifically of Canadian magazines, have now retired or died or moved on, and a younger generation of editors, who are mostly themselves poets, obviously, have different ideas about what poetry should do. So I am hopeful that some of my poems will survive me, but I don't know.
Yes, but it will certainly, at least from my point of view as a reader. The reason why I asked you about time and space, because one looks at the table of content of Moorings, right?
Yes,
The first section, and it's so intriguing, is the past is a foreign country. And then you have a section, late comer. Yeah. So, I mean, there is time and space, right? So the idea that the past is a foreign country this is, for me, it's very innovative because, allow me a little bit, we are more or less of the same age a little bit. I'm a little bit younger, but I have also a European past, and I have a Latin American past, and I have a French past, and I have a long Canadian past, So if I look this in terms of spaces, yes, I've lived in different countries, and each period has its time.
I very much appreciate the fact that I've been able to live in different countries and that I am fluent in anyway two common languages, German and Dutch.
Yes, of course.
My French is not nearly as good as it should be, since my father taught French for 30 years and was himself French and so on. But that's another story. Anyway, I think it's for me, it's been very important that I have lived in other countries and that I have been able to understand other literatures in their own language. This gives a sense of relativity, which I think is important. I mean, unless you are by nature sort of totalitarian, doctrinaire, and so on, and can only think within very narrow limits, I think you're inevitably going to be enlarged by. I mean, I'm not saying it's something as just as banal as travel broadens the mind, but it does things. I mean, it all depends how you travel, and what I'm talking about is not really traveling as a tourist, but actually living for 5 months in Yugoslavia, living for a shorter period. There was only about 3.5 months in India, living for about 3 months in St. Petersburg, Russia, and all of these things I feel have contributed something to what I write about and to how I feel about the world in general. I don't know if that's
it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of
what
sense.
you were trying to get at.
Yeah. Let me try.
Yes, the past. Inevitably, I think, at 92, you spend a lot of time thinking about your earlier selves, and how things would have worked out if you had done this and rather than that, and so on, and sometimes there's simply memories. I mean, that one Mr. Schlesinger, we called him Mr. Schlesinger because I didn't know German at the time. That is a very clear sort of memory for me, but it connects up, and I mean, all poetry, as far as I'm concerned, is concerned with the connection. I mean, whether they're connections.
Let me try out a metaphoric application referring now to another chapter. Suggests that there you have got time and space intertwined, the most beautiful association. You call this section brush strokes, of course, like a painter, brush strokes. And there you bring a long, not just a list, but it is you as a poet connecting with artists, with Cézanne, with Chardin, with Daumier, with Feininger, with Goya, with Guardi, with Käthe Kollwitz, with Matisse, with Nolde, with George O'Keeffe, and so forth. So what does painting mean to you? I mean, and particularly with this very interesting metaphorical understanding of a brush stroke. This is time and space, right?
Well, I mean, I had written a number of these poems over the years.
Yes,
they're not all recent, and I've always been very interested in the visual arts. I'm particularly good drawer, but I have the collection there. I mean, is not an attempt to be in any way comprehensive. There are a number of people whose work I really admire that I haven't written poems about. These are the ones that affect me in one way or another. Connecting up with sometimes with specific themes, like for instance with Chardin.
Right.
I see before me as I'm talking to you now. I mean, certain paintings, and what I admire about them is this calm and sort of stillness and harmony and so on. Whereas with Goya, it's exactly the opposite. For instance, I did realize that I had a number of these poems about painters, and then I thought, well, this might make a section in itself, and that's why. But that wasn't the initial intention. It's just that painting, like music, is something that I sort of addicted to.
Yes.
And
There's also a poem about music. Yes, right. Yeah. I would like to underscore this, for me, quite obvious implication already with your poem that you just read about history. There is a section in Moorings which you entitled, and this is really, really so. I would almost call it poésie engagée. It is dealing with contemporary issues and problems. You entitled the section "The Camps." The camps.
Yeah, right.
Where you as a poet have lived the 20th century, and your poet history brings it up again. But this is so outspoken, so clear, and still upsetting us. It is in any case very, very meaningful. Could you comment a little bit about the camps?
Yeah, well, of course, I was saying that one of the most important things from my point of view about my life is that I have lived in the various other countries, and that started really, apart from 2 school visits in my mid-teens, but it started really in 1953. I think you do know about this about me. And I mean, I was brought up as a Quaker. I was a conscientious objector, and at the time in England, this would be 1952. I had to go before a tribunal, and because I was a member of the Society of Friends of Quakers, and they are known for their peace testimony, it was more or less a formality. But nevertheless, you had to go before a tribunal and be allowed to do alternative service. Now, the alternative service I did was with the Friends Ambulance Unit International Service. The Friends Ambulance Unit, which was run by the Quakers, was actually an ambulance unit during the First and Second World Wars. But after the war, when conscription was still there, it lasted, I think, in England till 1958. It was one of the organizations that the government allowed for people who were conscientious objectors who didn't want to join the army, which you would otherwise have had to do. And this is a long explanation, but I think I need to do it. How it worked was that once you joined, you were sent to, in England or Scotland sometimes, sent to a hospital to work as a ward orderly. I worked as a ward orderly in a TB hospital in Malvern in England. Yeah, that was the main thing. Or forestry. and I was sent up to the Scottish borders, actually. And what we were doing, we're not cutting trees or anything, romantic at all. We were digging what possible roads through the forest. And the money that we earned there, I mean, we got an allowance of about 30 shillings a week at that time, which really wasn't very much. The money that we earned there in the Forestry Commission or in the hospitals was used by the Friends Ambulance Unit to support relief work wherever it was needed in Europe, war-battered Europe still at that time. And I was supposed to be going to Germany after I'd been in the forestry and the hospitals. I was supposed to be going to a refugee children's home near Cologne, and eventually I did get there. But first of all, in the February the 2nd in 1953, there were the Dutch floods, which were the third worst in Dutch history, and a lot of people were drowned. A lot of villages were submerged, and a lot of people evacuated to other parts of the Netherlands. And we were sent over there, not immediately, but I think it was in April or May of 1953, to clean out houses that had been underwater, to help rebuild barns and so on in these rather isolated islands and peninsulas that formed Zeeland in the south of the Netherlands. And that was the first of the sort of camp. And it was important to me personally, not just because, this was a foreign country and so on, but because it was very much an international camp. At that time, later on in the year, not so much, but there were young Germans, there was a Norwegian, there was an Italian, there was a Turkish woman, and there were 2 American women. And these were all there along with Dutch volunteers as well. And we sang our folk songs in the evenings, and it was very, my parents were really fairly international, my father obviously, but not at that time less so, but this was a real sort of baptism in a sense into sort of international spirit. And the camp, I call it the camps, and of course that has overtones of concentration camps, but the initial camps that I was in were a very positive sort of experience, and we were all doing something we wanted to do and meeting other young people, But then it gets darker, of course, and the second poem, Another Country, which obviously I don't say so in so many words, but it's obviously about Israel and Gaza.
Yes,
or rather about Gaza and Palestine.
Yes.
And then it goes on from there. The Shredder and most of these poems, as you say, are engagés, yes, are involved in politics. Although I said in that poem that I read, History, Alas, Never an Activist, I have been on marches and vigils and so on, but I feel that I want to make clear my own views. No, that's the wrong way of putting it. If you don't write poems to make clear your views, I want to explore what I felt and see if it makes any sort of pattern. And that's what I'm trying to do, I suppose, especially in that section around society and around politics.
Yes, well,
Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, and if you wish, I think for our listeners, it would be very revealing and meaningful to understand that you are with this collection of poetry really on the spot. You you just mentioned Gaza, and there is one poem, if you have the page in front of you, it's actually of drone on page 69.
Okay.
Would you like to read this to close?
Yes.
To close our conversation, because time is running out. So it's called The Drone.
All right.
And I think there are not that many poems about the drones about which we hear every day,
Yeah, that's right, yes. Yeah. Okay, would you like me to read that then?
Please do that, if you wish.
On paper, it seemed like a good idea. Surgical strikes, zeroing in, taking out known terrorists, a laser targeting one rogue cell in the body politic. Unlike the drone of a 1,000-bomber raid, where high above compassion, navigators connected dots of fire in the darkened cities. This is more accurate. Even so, there are always mistakes. Through faulty intelligence, Pakistani villagers, no matter who their kin, terrified families crouch under collapsing walls, collateral. In the White House and the Pentagon, robotic bureaucrats with clean hands and cooler heads prevail and see the big picture without the distorting lens of imagination. As with a video game whose outcome leaves no residue, on paper, it works well.
That means a lot to me in terms of your concerns and your views of what's going on in our world. Christopher Levenson, I thank you so much. Thank you so much for this long time, this long interview.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Yes.
I mean, the thing about poetry is that, you get occasional reviews. I mean, there's not very much, as I said.
Oh, you got a wonderful review. No, you got a wonderful review. On your homepage. No. You got a wonderful review on your homepage. I read it. You are very, very well received, at least in British Columbia, but maybe also beyond the province, all over Canada, and maybe also in the English-speaking world.
But I don't think that's true, unfortunately. I mean, one of the troubles about Canada, at least where poetry is concerned, not so much with fiction, is that we're regionalized. I mean, certain people like Alperdi and Margaret Atwood and Irving Lincoln and so on cover the whole country. But for the most part, I mean, there's Maritimes, and there's Quebec, and there's Ontario, and there's the prairies, and there's British Columbia. And most of the time, most of the poets don't know what is happening in other areas. And I think this is it happens also in the health services. We're balkanized, I think. I mean, this is my biggest discontent about Canada now. I mean, just let me rant for a moment. I mean, why do we have 10 or 11 different provincial territorial health services instead of one that covers the whole country? I mean, so many novelists. And the same applies, I feel, to literature.
Yes,
or at least to poetry. I mean, not so much to fiction.
Take the Giller Prize, I mean, there should be more emphasis on poets, Rarely, once in a while, there is a mention of poets, but in the Giller Prize, of course, good fiction, yes, is okay, but poetry
This is the problem with poetry. I mean, everybody, they place poetry up there on a pedestal, but, if everybody that claims that they have an interest in poetry would buy one book of poetry per year, I mean, we'd all be really well off. I mean, both intellectually and spiritually. and financially. But this doesn't happen. I mean, it's something that a lot of people say, oh, well, I can't understand poetry because they haven't read the right poem. And other people think it's all airy-fairy, have a sort of 19th century romantic view of it, and so on. I mean, there's lip service paid to poetry, but not all that many people actually get down to reading it and talking about it and thinking about it.
Christopher, thank you so much. And we will see you again with a new collection, or maybe with poems you would like to bring to the attention of our listeners. It would be a great pleasure having you again on my show. Bye-bye for now.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
That was Literature News Podcast on YouTube. I am Hans-Georg Ruprecht. Thank you very much for listening.